Welcome to the session. Today we are going to talk about creating your first test in Playwright. We are going to create a basic script, but I will provide all the necessary information that you need to understand before you create any test script using Playwright. So I would recommend watching the entire session to understand all those things. Logically, every programming language remains same, but there is some new terminology and some minor differences, especially if you haven't worked with JavaScript earlier. I highlighted some of those in my agenda for today, so which we are going to discuss during the test script creation. Let me open my VS Code editor. On the left hand pane, under the project folder, you can see the first folder is node modules. This is the directory where npm download and install all the dependencies and packages that are needed for your Playwright automation. This is slightly different from Java based projects where the libraries are downloaded into a central repository location in your machine and they will be referenced from there. Whereas in Node.js projects, these packages are downloaded to the project folder locally. If I expand the next directory tests, you can see there is a file example.spec.ts which is created by Playwright by default. And Playwright executor will run the test cases from this folder. Why? Because in your playwright.config.ts we have specified the test directory. You can create a new folder and run the test cases from there, but you have to modify it in this configuration file. So let me delete this script so that we can start from scratch. Now I'm going to create a subfolder named session 3. Technically it is session 3. And let me create a new file. First test. When you are giving it a name, you have to add the extension spec.ts for TypeScript and spec.js for JavaScript related test scripts. And now what will be the first statement in any programming language? The import statement. So you need to import the necessary libraries to use Playwright commands. If you look at the syntax, we are trying to import two functions from the Playwright package. So one of them is test, which defines your test case, and expect is a function which you can use to add assertions in your test. And Playwright/test, it is the core package which has these functions. And Playwright uses a feature called named imports, which is why you have to mention the functions inside a curly braces. And inside the curly braces, you can specify one or more functions. Even if you import one function, you have to specify it inside the curly braces. Now let me add the import statement inside my script. Import test comma expect inside the curly braces from, in double quotes, you have to specify the Playwright core package @playwright/test. If we compare this with the Selenium import statement where we specify import org.openqa.selenium.webdriver. WebDriver is an interface here and rest of them is the package name. As we have already imported the required libraries, now let us start writing the test function. So the syntax of the test function starts with a keyword called test. And this test will have two arguments, whereas the first argument is your name of your test. So I'm going to write this as verify source demo site is launched. And the second argument is going to be a function, as we write the functions with the open and closed braces. But this function will not have a explicit name. So the test argument itself has a test name, but the function will not contain any other name for itself. And JavaScript has a functionality called arrow function. So we have to define this as an arrow function, and this is how we specify the arrow functions with this symbol. And then, as you know that every function is followed by a curly brace, open and closed, inside which we write the actual logic. And this is the base syntax for your test function. And there are two more keywords that we need to add to this test function. One of them is async. Before the function, we have to specify this function is a asynchronous function, and this function handles the asynchronous nature of the website. So let us talk about that. So if you consider any modern web applications, They're all asynchronous in nature, which means the entire web page will not wait until all the components are loaded. So your web page may have some data fetching from a server, it might have some UI components, which means the website is not frozen. It is still interactive for the users, while the background tasks are still in progress, such as fetching the data from the server. So the way the data is being pulled is not synchronous, it is in asynchronous in nature. Now coming back to the QA automation. So for example, if you want to interact with a component on your web application, so you have to make sure that the component is already loaded on the screen. And if you are clicking on a link and open a new tab, before interacting with the new tab, you have to make sure the page is loaded successfully or the components you are going to interact are loaded successfully. So we have to deal with the asynchronous nature of these applications. So which is why JavaScript provides a keyword called async, so which you can specify it before the arrow function to indicate that you are going to handle the asynchronous nature of the application by specifying it as async. We also need to include one more keyword inside this arrow function, which is called a fixture. We are going to send a fixture called page. Now let us talk about what are fixtures. In Playwright's test runner will manage the browser's lifecycle, whether launching the web page or closing the web page after the test execution. And if we look at the Playwright's execution framework, so before running your actual test script, whatever the test function you are defining here, before running your test function, Playwright's test runner will launch the browser and Playwright will prepare an environment. When I say preparing an environment, the test runner will initialize few global variables called fixtures. When the test runner opens the browser, it initializes various fixtures. Similar to page, there are various built-in fixtures within Playwright. By initializing the fixtures, it provides a direct reference to use the Playwright's features and methods. And that is why in Playwright's implementation, you will not see creating a driver or launching the browser related implementation. And if we look at the other built-in fixtures, they include browser, context. Context is a isolated session. So if you need to use the same application with a different user without any overlap, you can use the fixture called context. And page. Page is nothing but a browser tab and browser name, and there is a fixture called request. This is for API testing. And there is a fixture called storage state where you can manage your authentication information. So using the browser cookies without logging in again and again, you can use the same authentication information in the next tests as well. And inside a test function, you can also send multiple fixtures as well. And also user can create custom fixtures if you want to make your code cleaner and reusable. Now switching back to the test function, we can start writing the script using the page fixture. So we don't have to create any driver like in Selenium where we specify Chrome driver, assign it with a new Chrome driver instance. As the page fixture is already initialized, we can directly start using it. You can use page.goto, which is for navigating to a URL. And coming to our next step, which is verifying the page title. So we have to use the expect function. So expect function, you have to send the page fixture as an argument. And the method to verify is to have title. Now send the title of the application for comparison. And now we have to add one more keyword which is called await before every statement that interacts with a browser or that interacts with the browser elements. These asynchronous operations will return a promise. So the execution has to wait until it receives a promise. What is this promise? Promise is a JavaScript object that represents the state like completion or failure of a asynchronous operation. So once this task is completed, then only the execution should move on to the next task. So in this script, we are trying to launch the website and then validate the title. So the validation step should be executed only after the page load is completed successfully. And how do we know where to use this await statement? So we have to add this await statement for every statement that interacts with the browser, or navigating between browsers, or validating the browser. The async keyword that we have added to the arrow function, it tells the JavaScript that this function will handle asynchronous operations. And by specifying a function as async, it allows us to use await keyword. So these two are very important. So you have to add the arrow function with asynchronous keyword, and then it will allow us to use the await keyword. And this keyword will pause, and it will pause the execution until it receive a promise from the executed task, which is launching the browser in the first case. Now let us start running this test case using the command npx playwright test. And by default, Playwright will run the tests in headless mode. So you have to specify hyphen hyphen headed to be able to see the browser execution. You can see the browser is launched. And by default, our playwright.config.ts has all the three browsers. So this test is going to run for all the browsers. So we have to modify the config.ts file if you need to update the browsers. You can see the execution is completed. Let me use this command to open the report. You can see the report for all the three browsers. And that brings us to the end of the session for today. I hope this provided the detailed explanation that you needed to understand. And the next session will focus on various locators that you can use. Thank you for watching.